Have you ever been told you didn't need something for so long that you start to believe it? My name is Eugene Hartley. I am 62 years old, and the week I retired from paper mill, a letter arrived that my father had written 9 years before I opened it. It was sitting on the kitchen table in the Midlothian Boulevard house when I came down at 7:38 in the morning. A standard white envelope, my name in my father's handwriting, the return address a law office in Youngstown I had never seen. My work jacket was still hanging by the back door. It still smelled like the mill. I sat down and held the envelope in both hands for a long time before I opened it. Welcome back to Dad's True Revenge, where silence is never surrender. If you've ever given everything and got nothing back, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. My name is Eugene Hartley. I am 62 years old, and I have lived on Midlothian Boulevard on the south side of Boardman, Ohio for the past 27 years, in a house I bought when my daughter Nora was 3, and the neighborhood was quieter than it is now. The house has a covered front porch and a furnace that knocks in the cold months, and a third porch step that has creaked since 1999, and that I have never repaired because the sound it became, at some point, familiar enough to count as mine. I retired 8 months ago from the Boardman-Poland paper mill after 22 years as a shift supervisor. I worked the floor myself for the first 6 of those years before moving into the supervisory role, and I kept a hand on the floor work for the remaining 16, because I did not trust the kind of authority that loses its relationship with the actual work. My ex-wife, Sandra, left in 2004 when Nora was 3. I raised Nora alone after that. 14 years of school events, parent-teacher nights, the championship swim meet in Columbus she had asked me specifically not to miss, which I did not miss because I traded a Saturday shift with a crew member named Dale and drove the 4 hours without telling Nora I had traded a shift. She found out 3 years later. She called me about it on a Sunday evening and did not say much, just that she knew. And I said I knew she knew, and we moved on. That is how the Hartley family communicates the important things. In the gaps between sentences, in the things not said that nonetheless arrive. I worked a 5:47 a.m. shift every scheduled day for the final 11 years at the mill without calling in sick once. I drove my mother to her eye appointments every other Wednesday for 6 years after my father's health declined, and Clifton stopped making the drive from his house in Canfield. I sent my parents $300 every month from 2009 until my mother passed in 2018. Without mentioning it to Clifton or to my parents' neighbor, who sometimes asked how the family was managing. I kept the Midlothian Boulevard house, my parent house, before they moved to the assisted living facility on Glenwood, maintained for 4 years after they left it. Lawn in summer, furnace filter every 3rd month, gutter clearing in November before the freeze. I did these things because they needed doing, and I was the one available to do them, which in my experience is how most necessary work gets assigned. My father kept his own counsel. That was a phrase my mother used for him when she wanted to explain why he did not discuss certain things, financial things, planning things, the arrangements he had made for the years after he was gone. He was a methodical man. He had worked the same Youngstown fabrication plant for 31 years. He understood the value of a document. He believed, as far as I could tell, that a thing properly arranged in writing did not require discussion. It simply needed to be found when the time came. The sealed envelope that arrived on March 3rd, my 62nd birthday, had been prepared, according to the cover letter inside, by Russell Vance, an estate attorney with an office on Market Street in Youngstown, who had been my father's appointed independent trustee since November 2014. The cover letter explained that my father had established an irrevocable trust in my name in the fall of 2014, to be held sealed until my 62nd birthday, and then delivered by registered mail to Midlothian Boulevard address my father had provided. The trust had been funded over the following years through a series of structured transfers my father had arranged without involving my mother's estate or Clifton's inheritance. The envelope contained the cover letter, the trust document, 41 pages, blue cover stock, notary stamp from November 2014, and a single handwritten note from my father on his personal stationery. The note was 4 sentences. I read it 3 times before I put it down. I had not known the trust existed. My father had not mentioned it. Clifton had never mentioned it because, as I would later understand, Clifton did not know it existed either. My father had arranged it entirely outside the main estate, a separate instrument, a separate attorney, a separate account, structured specifically so that it could not be touched, contested, or disclosed before the date he had set. He had thought about this for a long time. My brother Clifton was 4 years younger than me and had lived his entire adult life in a radius of 12 miles from the house we grew up in. He was not a bad man in the ways that announced themselves. He was the kind of man who borrowed small amounts and forgot to repay them, who arrived late to important things and explained his lateness with detail, who understood the family's resources as available to him in a way that he had never fully examined. When my father died in November 2014, a Tuesday, 6:17 in the morning, cardiac event, the call came to my cell phone at the mill, and I finished the shift handover before leaving because there was nothing I could do by leaving faster. Clifton assumed the role of estate administrator. He said he had spoken with the family attorney. He said there were some debts against the estate. He said it would take time. The call came on the second Tuesday in January of 2015 at 6:22 in the evening. I was at the kitchen table on Midlothian with the week's paperwork from the mill. Clifton said the estate was settled. He said the accounting had been complicated. He said there was nothing remaining for me. My throat tightened at the particular evenness of his voice, the way he said it as if reading from a document, without pause, without acknowledgement that this was my father's money and my father's choices he was describing. He said, "Eugene, Mom and Dad always said you were the one who could handle things on your own. That's why they left the decisions to me. They knew you didn't need it the way we did." Something in me went flat. I said nothing. I looked at the mill paperwork on the table. The fluorescent light above the sink had been flickering for 3 days. The radiator knocked once long in the wall. I told him I understood. I said good night and set the phone down. I had paid $4,800 out of my own checking account to cover the balance on my father's funeral costs when Clifton said the estate account was temporarily frozen. I had organized and donated my parents' household contents personally across 4 weekends, driving the truck myself, because Clifton said he was too busy with work. I had covered 3 months of my parents' assisted living gap payment, $1,400 each month, when the facility's billing structure changed and no one else had the funds available. I had done these things in the same way I did most things, without announcement, without keeping a running account, without the expectation that they would be acknowledged or reciprocated. And now Clifton was telling me, in the reasonable tone of a man who had worked this out in advance, that there was nothing for me because our parents had always known I did not need anything. My breath caught. I sat with it. At a family gathering the following Easter at Clifton's house in Canfield, Paulette, Clifton's wife, a careful woman who spoke in pleasantries and meant things she did not say directly, asked me in the kitchen whether I was doing all right financially, given everything. She said it the way people ask questions whose answers they already believe they know. She said she just wanted to make sure I was managing. She said, "We worried about you for a while, with the mill and everything, but you always did land on your feet." My face went still. I kept my voice steady. I told her I was fine. I drove home on Route 224 that afternoon. I had worked the Christmas Eve shift 3 years running, so younger crew members with children could take the night. I had covered double shifts in November and December each year Nora was growing up, so Christmas did not require borrowing. I had not asked my parents for $1 after the age of 19, not once, and I had held that discipline privately as a kind of pride, the pride of a man who handles his own weight. Now I understood that my family had taken that discipline and used it as a reason. My eyes stung in the cab of the truck. Not tears. The kind of pressure that comes when something you believed about yourself turns out to have been someone else's convenience. The 9 years between Clifton's call in January 2015 and the morning the envelope arrived on March 3rd of this year were not years I spent waiting. I worked my shifts. I paid my bills. I watched Nora finish her degree and take a job in Cleveland and start building a life the way I had tried to build mine, steadily, without asking for more room than was given. I did not think often about this state. I had accepted Clifton's account the way I accepted most things I could not verify, without drama, and with a private reservation that the truth of a thing and the account given of it are sometimes different. On the morning of March 3rd, sitting at the kitchen table with the envelope, I read the cover letter twice. Then I picked up the phone and called the number on the letterhead. The office of Russell Vance, estate attorney, 847 Market Street, Youngstown, at 9:14 a.m. Russell Vance picked up on the third ring. He was a quiet man with a deliberate manner of speaking, the kind of attorney who confirms things before he states them. He said he was glad I had called. He said the trust had been triggered by my birthday 3 days prior, and the registered letter had gone out with a standing instruction. He said my father had been very specific about the conditions. He said there was an appointment available at 10 a.m. the following Thursday if I want to come in and go through the document in detail. I said I would be there. I put the phone down. The kitchen was quiet. The furnace knocked once. The third porch step creaked in the cold as the wood contracted. My father had written 4 sentences to me on his personal stationery. The 4th sentence was, "You never asked for anything." That was always the part one wanted to fix. Something in my chest turned over. I sat with that for a long time. The following Thursday, April 10th, I drove to the Market Street office at 9:43 a.m. and parked in the lot behind the building. Russell Vance's office was on the 3rd floor, small, ordered, the kind of room that had been the same for decades. He had the trust document on the desk when I arrived, open to the summary page. He walked me through the structure. My father had funded the trust over 7 years through a combination of retained savings and a life insurance instrument that had been structured outside the main estate. The assets had grown during the holding period. The total value of the trust, as of the most recent statement, was $347,000. My throat went dry. I looked at the number on the page. Not the rounded kind. $347,219 as of March 31st. Russell Vance said the trust was irrevocable and had been held in my name exclusively since November 2014. He said Clifton had no claim to it, had never been named in the document, and had not been informed of its existence as a matter of my father's specific instruction. He said my father had been very clear on that point. He said, "Your father wrote a note in the file. He said he wanted this to come to you, without anyone else's hands on it first." I sat with that. Russell Vance said the distribution would require my signature on the acceptance document, a notarized transfer authorization, and a coordination with the trust bank officer. I said I was ready. Margaret Elias, a notary at the Mahoning County Administrative Office, notarized my transfer acceptance at 2:44 p.m. on October 9th. She stamped the document with a flat, final sound a notary stamp always makes, the sound of something settling into a permanent record. Philip Dorr, the trust officer at First National Bank in Boardman, confirmed the transfer completion at 11:07 a.m. the following Thursday, October 9th. He read me the final figure. I wrote it on the back of a receipt from the hardware store on Midlothian because that was what I had in my jacket pocket. I drove home on Boardman-Poland Road. I called Clifton at 4:31 p.m. He picked up on the second ring. I could hear the television in the background, the particular afternoon game show sound of a weekday in his house. I told him I had something to let him know. I kept my voice level. I told him that Dad had set up a separate trust for me in 2014. I told him the attorney had reached out on my birthday. I told him the distribution had been completed. I said I was not calling to argue about the estate or to revisit the conversation we had had in January of 2015. I said I was calling because he was my brother, and it seemed right that he should hear it from me. There was a silence on the line. Clifton said, "How much?" I told him the figure. He did not speak for a long time. I heard the television change programs. I heard Paulette say something in the background that I could not make out. I did not fill the silence. Clifton said, "Dad never told me." I said, "No, he didn't." Clifton said, "He set that up without telling me." I said, "That's right." He said, "Eugene," and then stopped. I waited. He did not finish the sentence. I had not expected him to. The Hartley family communicates in gaps, in the things not said, in the space between what a man means to tell you and what he actually manages. I said goodnight. I set the phone on the kitchen table and looked out the back window. The yard on Midlothian was the same as it had always been. The oak tree my father had helped me plant in 1998, the garage with the overhead light I had never replaced, and that Nora had always complained about, the third porch step that still needed fixing, and that I would fix when I got around to it, which I understood now might be never, because some things become part of place and you stop noticing they were ever broken. Eugene Hartley, 62 years old, and his father had been thinking about him for 9 years without saying a word. The distribution cleared on a Thursday. I put a third of it in Nora's name. The rest I placed in a managed account that a financial advisor in Boardman had recommended when I asked about options for a man who was retired and not in a hurry. I did not call Clifton again. He called me once, in November, to ask how I was. I told him I was fine. We talked about the weather and about Nora's job in Cleveland and about the mill's reduced hours, which had been in the news. He did not mention the trust. I did not mention it either. The man who asked for nothing still deserves what was meant for him. My father understood that. He just needed 9 years and irrevocable trust to say it. The smell of his aftershave on a November morning. The particular creak of the third porch step. For sentences on personal stationery, in handwriting I would have recognized anywhere. Eugene Hartley, 62 years old, his father's son. If you were at that kitchen table on March 3rd, holding an envelope in your father's handwriting that had been waiting 9 years for your birthday, if you've ever been told you didn't need what was already meant for you, leave a comment and tell me what you would have done with those 4 sentences. And if this story found you today, hit the like button and subscribe to Dad's True Revenge. If you like this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And as always, thank you for being a part of this fear.